Hunting for fun has been a long contested issue around the world, especially in more recent years. But if you are hunting for food, at least a good portion, I dare say the majority of people would at least understand why you're doing that. At least from my experience, that is the type of hunting that tends to be more acceptable. But when you hunt for sport or entertainment, I would dare say the majority of people aren't for that. But we're not talking about the morality of hunting in general today. Today, we are talking specifically about a type of hunting that takes place in Europe, around the world really, but here in the UK and Ireland, it happens overabundantly. We're talking about pheasant shooting. Now, a lot of people living in this place, or these places, will think that pheasants are a native species that they've seen growing up, and I grew up with them, I've saw them a lot growing up. They are a non-native species to Europe in general, introduced from Asia, a world away from where we are in the UK. And not only are they introduced every single year, they are introduced in their tens of millions. These fairly large birds that have never once been native, never evolved to the British Isles, started being introduced only a few hundred years ago, which in evolutionary and ecological terms is no time at all. So we are still only just seeing the ecological impact these non-native species are having on our environment. And it's not just that. So these animals are introduced every single year because they die. If they're not shot by people, they die in their droves naturally because they are not built for this environment. They are built for warmer climates. They are built for drier climates. So the majority of them do end up dying off. And if we didn't reintroduce any more, they would go extinct, which, in my opinion, as an ecologist, should be the way things go. So these non-native species are released in their droves. Between 47 and 57 million birds, non-native birds, both red-legged partridges from Spain and pheasants from Asia, are introduced into the countryside every single year. Now let's think about that from an ecological standpoint, and I'm going to show you one of their problems and their impacts. Here we have documented evidence of one of the worst things that pheasants do to our environment and our ecology here in the UK. This little reptile here is a grass snake, one of our few reptile species we still have today, and that is a juvenile or female pheasant. Hard to tell them apart because males get their plumage when they're fully mature. But regardless, here we have a pheasant consuming that snake. Our reptiles are already in very poor state, and whilst grass snakes aren't considered endangered in the UK, we do have a few amphibians and reptiles that are, especially sand lizards, which are very, very endangered. And pheasants do eat them. You might not see them as a big predator, but to a reptile, to the reptiles we have here in the UK, they are a major threat. And when you introduce millions of these non-native birds, not only are they eating these reptiles, they are competing with other native bird species. So even when you factor in all of the birds that die due to fox predation, getting run over by cars, being actually shot by the gunmen themselves, there are still millions of birds here in the UK remaining, and the total biomass of all of those remaining birds outweighs our native birds. So if you were to weigh all our native birds together, plop them down on a scale, they would be less than the total sum of all those introduced non-native birds. So they are outcompeting our native species. They are competing for resources, space to breed. They are a proper nuisance, tipping the scale that just shouldn't be here. The only reason they're here is tradition, and it is a short-lived tradition that's only been going a few hundred years. And not only that, it is not a poor man's tradition. It is only for upper class people, people with money, and easy access to getting a gun license, as with most hunting here in the UK. And what may be even the biggest issue overall to certain people, especially those who keep chickens, turkeys, or just generally love birds, bird flu is a massive issue, and it's currently on the rise. It has always been an issue. It impacts our puffin populations. It impacts every single raptor species. It impacts all of our birds. But poultry are going to be kept indoors. These are animals that we actually eat. Whereas pheasants are left to roam wild. People consider them a wild animal, even though they are reared in their millions and released in their millions from stock that is raised in captivity. They're not a domestic animal, they're not livestock, but if you go and kill them or take them or steal them without the proper pay going to the right people, that's breaking the law. Considering they're a non-native species. Bird flu has been found in 10,000 pheasants in Lancashire alone. 10,000. That vector of disease, that vector of disease should be more than enough reason to stop pheasant releases in entirety. There is no reason this should keep going on. And it just keeps happening. Every single year, these animals are reared in their millions, released in their millions to consume crops, native species, compete with our native species, take up room from our native species, and spread disease. This isn't right. This has never been a good thing. And one of the most infuriating things is how lax the rules are. You can release these guys, no issue. Very little policing around this issue. But if you want to introduce a native species that will actually help the ecology of the UK, like the beaver, a keystone species that has unparalleled ecological influence on its environment, you have to jump through so many hoops, you have to get through so much red tape that it's practically impossible to do a full release. Only in Scotland do actual full releases take place. So, a lot of people in England and parts of Wales, I believe, have done illegal releases. And I say illegal like this because it's a stupid law. It makes sense that you want to be 100% careful to make sure that they're not going to negatively impact people and the environment around them. But this is a native species that's been here for thousands, if not millions of years. It is ridiculous. And they are a positive on the environment because they belong here. The same goes for the wild boar, which is fighting for its life in the tiny pockets where it still remains. People say they are a threat to their lives and the lives of their dogs. They're more so a threat to dogs and people than maybe a pheasant is, but the actual true risk, if you factor in all the other species, including domestics, it is negligible. I saw one of these guys in Japan whilst walking on a trail. It ran away. Most of the time they will. If you corner them or let your dog run up to them, that's going to be an issue. But people, a lot of people, just don't want to hear that. But what about our predators? I'm always a predator guy. I love apex predators, but we have none. We need them. But people are still saying, it's too much. But this is a native species. The lynx is a native species that belongs here. There's nothing in the pipework for their reintroduction. If I were to release this native species, I'd be arrested. It doesn't make sense. But let's focus on a bird. This white-tailed eagle, one of our only 2 native species of eagle, doesn't really exist in England anymore. It has been extirpated because farmers and game wardens think it is a threat to their livelihood. Really isn't. But regardless, this species is truly native, yet if you want to reintroduce them, you have to jump through all the hoops and just hope that people say yes. It truly, truly is not fair. And that's without even mentioning the effect it has on populations of mesocarnivores like foxes. It artificially bolsters their numbers every single year, so you have more foxes than the actual environment is supposed to be able to support because you're introducing these non-native species that they will readily eat. There's also animal welfare concerns. A lot of people like to say that pheasants provide a source of food for communities, but pheasant is quite expensive. And the majority of the animals that are shot don't ever see a butcher or any food rack. Instead, they're dumped in their droves, left to rot in the environment, feasted upon by wildlife like foxes, again bolstering their numbers artificially. And other than that, these piles of dead animals fester, spreading yet more and more disease. It's just not right. And of course, our native raptors are persecuted because they would dare to steal the hunter's quarry. Not just pheasants, but red-like partridges and red grouse. Red grouse is actually a native species that is almost acting like an invasive because we artificially inflate their numbers too. We burn the moorland so that it's better for grouse to breed. Sounds good, right? You're just increasing a native species numbers. You're helping them. They are not endangered. They will never be endangered in this country. They are doing just fine, and they were doing fine even before this. But that's another issue for another day. But because people want an easy shoot, they just want to walk into the countryside. Oh, there's a bird, bang. There's a bird, bang. There's a bird, bang. They just enjoy shooting. There's no sport in it. It's not even a game. It's more shooting fish in a barrel. And to do that, they persecute raptors that might feed on these overly abundant species. Where is the fairness in that? But enough bad news. Here's a little good news that happened back in 2018. Pheasant shooting was banned on public land in Wales. Now, there's not actually a lot of public land. This would mean areas like national parks and so on and so forth. Most of the countryside in the UK is privately owned anyway, so it's not really going to change much, but it's still going to have some positive gain. The overall industry needs to end. There is no point in continuing it. It is detrimental and overall going to negatively impact the economy because we have to deal with these diseases spreading to our food stock, our native wildlife. It is only an industry that benefits a very small amount of the population, those with a lot of money and too much time on their hands. Anyway, this has been my rant for the day. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and if you are a hunter that didn't know how detrimental this was and you're looking to change, good on you. If you knew all this and don't care, bye.